It is the 262nd day of the year. There are 103 days left in 2023, and welcome to another edition of Tuesdays with Thom. Back in my college days, an incident occurred that remotely parallels today's G-list guest and her topic. Her subject is reducing mental health stigma and fostering positive mental well-being, particularly among youth. In my college days, we had one of our athletes, and he was also a friend, go off on what we described as the deep end, because we really didn't know what to call it. He literally was out there. He saw things we couldn't see. We were ignorant of what to do about it, and we didn't have a clue as to what to do about it. We didn't realize what he was going through. We eventually got the athletic representatives, we got him the medical attention he needed. Since that time, I've come to learn more about mental health and how it doesn't have to be a visible outcry like our friend experienced. I realize now that we were traveling through what was a traumatic time. We were all traumatized. I can see now that couple of guys I knew, one who ended up committing suicide, I could see the depression that he carried when alone in his room, longing to be more included, longing to be themselves if only they knew who that person was allowed to be. So we look forward to that conversation. Our G-list guest is Fani Sculley. She's a Chief Operating Officer of Speak to Inspire. We look forward to that with Premier Consulting Agency, who is dedicated to improving the mental health of young adults. Look forward to that discussion. Our show today, of course, is sponsored by the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Let's hear from Best Girl.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly-Gossam, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
Best Girl customizes a solution that fits your needs. So let's get to our roundtable regulars, Barbara Wallace Edwards and Michael Walker. Good morning, Barbara Wallace Edwards. How are you?
Good morning, Thom. I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you today?
I am doing very well. Thank you. So
Good.
what's going on in your world?
Thom, I had a really busy weekend. On Friday, I attended a beautiful wedding of a young lady I've known since she was probably 2 years old, and the daughter of one of my dear friends, Jasan Rump here in Birmingham, married the love of her life, Mr. Eric Golden. I want to say congratulations to that wonderful couple. And then on Saturday, I attended homecoming festivities in the game in Auburn University, where they kicked off the celebration of 60 years of integration at the university. So that was fun-filled day. Saw lots of people I haven't seen in at least a year, and some even longer than that. But had a pretty good turnout there. And then Sunday, I spent some time at the lake, and that was super relaxing. Didn't want to come home. Made it home late last night and missed my great nephew's football game. I have to apologize to KJ for missing his game last night. I didn't quite make it back in time for that. But congratulations, KJ, on your game last night.
Okay, well, let's go. Michael Walker, how are you doing?
Good morning, TG. I'm doing well. I hope you are too. And good morning to you, Barbara. I hope you are well also.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you.
What's happening in your world, Michael?
Well, it's funny. Barbara brought up Auburn University this weekend and the celebration of 60 years of integration, and that's good. I've got to talk about this guy named Tommy Tuberville. Tuberville has been busted. They always say that when you're trying to get that, the Bible verse said, when you're trying to get that splinter out of your neighbor's eye, get that beam out of your eye first.
Oh, yes.
Well, Tuberville has been raising a lot of cane lately because he's been holding up nominations to the military. Well, what we found out is that Tuberville has purchased up to $250,000 worth of stock in a telecommunication technology company, Qualcomm. And they are a defense contractor. Tuberville sits on the Armed Services Committee, where he oversees federal contracts and the awarding of contracts. Not only has he bought $250,000 worth most recently of Qualcomm, he's also bought stocks in Lockheed, Marietta, and many other defense contractors. And they are now saying that this is somewhat of a conflict of interest for him to be sitting on the Armed Service Committee and investing in contracts at the same time. And and he only disclosed it recently. Okay.
Wow.
But yet and still, he talks about NIL and the players should not be getting NIL. Okay. But he is sitting on the Armed Services Committee, holding up nominations of people to be appointed in positions in the military, and he is doing insider trading.
That definitely sounds like a conflict of interest, Michael.
It's a big conflict of interest. As a matter of fact, it's been said that he was against there was a 2012 called the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. Tuberville was an outspoken critic of that and said it was ridiculous. Now we know why.
Well, Tommy had some financial issues before he ever got to the Senate. Some investor trading or what have you. So maybe it's just following him around.
Maybe so.
It's interesting. Just yesterday, I had an experience, and I have these Auburn experiences from time to time. I had backed into a parking lot, and I was getting my things, and this gentleman walks out, elderly gentleman, and he stops and just looks at me. And I'm wondering, what is he looking at? And then I mean, he just stopped.
You didn't go after him, did you?
No, I didn't. I just thought for a minute, what is he looking at? And he just stood there and stopped. And I said, well, obviously he's waiting for me to get out of the car,
Right.
So I'm going to get out and investigate this situation. And soon as I get out of the car, he says, I see that tag on front of your car, War Eagle. And I said, well, War Eagle to you. And we had a conversation, friendly fella. And just out of nowhere, he said, Tommy Tuberville was an okay coach. He was a pretty good coach. Politics, not so much.
Yeah, he needs to go back to being coaching.
It was ironic. And he says, I don't care for his politics at all.
Interesting.
And I don't like that other fella either that he supports. I said, you talking about Trump? He said, yeah, I don't like Trump either.
Ask him, can he come talk to some of his friends over here in Alabama? Because we need more of them to think that way.
Well, that's what I was about to say. When you vote for somebody because they were a, quote, successful football coach, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate.
No,
and
not at all.
I was just shocked when they elected him over Doug Jones, who would have been a great senator, should have been the attorney general.
Absolutely.
And so you get what you pay for, I guess, or you get who you vote for. And I don't know. Just politics, man.
And while we're on the subject of Tommy, he's now saying that poetry is the proof that the Navy needs to root out wokeness. He's going around saying that because someone actually quoted poetry on a Navy ship, and he's now saying that the Navy just got to get rid of that. He's been widely criticized for blocking military promotions to promote the Pentagon's policy for supporting service members that with paid leave, that that anything has to do with abortions, and now he's saying poetry needs to be rooted out of the Navy. The man has
Yes.
issues.
All the while, this Qualcomm contract is worth 11.7 million, with the possibility of growing to 30 million. So I guess that $250,000 investment he made is going to end up growing by probably 30-40% here.
Well, while we're talking about Coach Tommy, I read a thing where he doesn't live where he says he lives.
Right.
He lives in Florida.
Lives in
Yeah.
Florida. Right.
He lives in Florida.
Senator
Right.
of Alabama, but he lives in Florida.
Yeah, he's representing the state of Alabama in the Senate, but he lives in Florida.
Yes.
Yeah. But nobody in Alabama is raising any hell over it, so I guess he gets away with it.
That's one time I kind of wish the people at Alabama would have taken their hate towards Auburn a little bit further.
Yes.
They should not have supported Tuberville because he beat Alabama 6 years in a row. I was really hoping that hate would come out and interfere with that, but it just didn't.
Well, they shouldn't have voted for him because he's not qualified. I don't care if he beat Alabama 30 times in a row. He's not qualified to be a United States Senator.
Absolutely.
Well, Thom, I would agree with you. Somebody who doesn't know what the Voting Rights Act is and the 3 different branches of government really shouldn't be there. I mean, we learned that in 5th grade,
Exactly. That's my point. I don't care about how many games he won.
Tommy was used just like they tried to use Herschel over in Georgia. Herschel was a resident of Texas, and they were trying to get him in as a senator in Georgia. They just used people who they knew were going to support a certain person and tried to push them into office. And Tommy got in because of the ignorance of some of the voters here in the state of Alabama.
You say that there's $250,000 investment in this company. I wonder who else invested in this company.
Yes.
That's way more than $250,000.
Yes.
And somebody put in the chat, Tommy Tuberville is an imbecile. However, he is who he is. Oh boy. Yeah. Anyway. All right, Michael, what else you got?
Well, I got a couple things. And on one end of the spectrum, you have Mel Tucker. The other end of the spectrum, you have Deion Sanders. It turns out that Michigan State is going to fire Mel Tucker. They've announced it, and they're going to fire him for cause, which means that $70 million that's left on his contract, he will not receive it.
Yeah.
Right.
So evidently they found enough to give them confidence that they can go forth and do that and fire him with cause. And their attorneys are saying you can do it. So
yeah, they're saying the man was set up. They saying he was set up, but he shouldn't have taken the bait on that one because it's sad. He's lost a lot.
I don't know how you can be set up in that situation. You know what I mean? First of all, you have the ability to say no as a grown man. Okay.
Right.
So how are you set up on a telephone call?
Well, let me ask a question.
I think it started before this telephone call.
Because I want
thing.
to get this clear in my mind. So what's the actual charge?
I don't really know. They've never really said. They just said
Somebody said something about him.
He pleasured himself
on the phone.
Right.
Yes, without her consent. That's what the charge said. The allegation is. I didn't know
she said he also made some inappropriate comments to her doing some actual face-to-face conversations, but she basically just didn't pay any attention to those. But it was doing that.
But you don't have direct evidence of that.
No.
Well, I'd like to know what the direct evidence is of him pleasuring himself. How do they know that? Was he breathing hard? What?
And even if he did, all she had to do was hang up. It's a phone conversation. It wasn't like she was locked in and couldn't move anywhere. He had her,
Or he
tied in a
forced
corner
her.
somewhere. Right.
He
He
didn't
didn't
force
force
her.
her. If he was pleasuring himself on a phone call with her, all she had to do was hang up the phone, and she wouldn't
But
have
you
heard
know
any
what,
of that.
Michael? Yeah, they fired him with cause, but they'll probably end up settling somewhere in between. And he'll get something. And I
Well,
don't know.
I hope so, because his reputation is going to be ruined now.
Yeah.
Oh
He
yeah,
won't
he's
be able to
done.
get hired anywhere else.
Right.
He's done. And
he's not going to get another opportunity.
And maybe rightfully so. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows?
Rumor has it that they wanted to get rid of him anyway. They were not pleased with his coaching, and so
they just gave him a big contract last year.
Right.
So who wasn't pleased?
Right. Yeah, I don't get that.
Some of the board of trustee members I heard, but again, that's all rumor, so you never know. But
so can we? So speaking of sports, as Howard Cosell used to say, what about the new NBA rule that these guys have to play in certain games? They were sitting out games. The Kawhi Leonard rule, I call it.
Load management.
Right. And so, people showed up at a big game and they don't play. So now the NBA has, in association with the Players Association, has agreed that, these guys will have to play on certain nights. I don't know. I don't really understand that. I don't understand why they wouldn't want to play. I mean, it isn't like they're not making a whole, I'll just say, shit pot full of money. Right. and why would they not want to play?
Not only that, TG, if they weren't in the NBA, they'd be playing for free down at the Y.
Right.
Thank you.
Right, Michael. Right.
Thank you. You're right. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, before we go, let me mention this to you guys. Tamika Reed, I think she's a basketball coach at Jackson State University, Deion's former school. And on Sunday, 60 Minutes had a follow-up interview with Deion Sanders about, Colorado and leaving Jackson State and all this. But you know how certain directors and management of television broadcasting operations, they do things for a dramatic impact. So during this clip of 60 Minutes, they decided to roll some camera of Jackson. So they went to the slummiest of houses and used that as a reflection of Jackson, Mississippi. And Tamika Reed called them out and said they ought to be ashamed for what they did. And they're showing that Deion left Jackson, Mississippi, and went to Boulder, Colorado. And she said, Jackson, Mississippi is a city that's 83% African-American. Boulder, Colorado is 1%. But you go to the slums of houses to put that on 60 Minutes as a representation of all of Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
And the guy came back and said, well, it was tape that we used before, and it's a house close to the campus.
Yeah, well,
wow.
I mean, I don't know. It's I was watching a little bit of, what game was Troy Aikman on last night? He was,
I think that was
something game.
That was the Steelers and the Browns, I think.
But his commentary was just kind of whack, man. I mean, he was way off, and it's interesting how they. I was watching. What's the two? I call them two clowns that come on in the afternoon.
Fine.
One of them's from Chicago,
Oh,
and the other one is anyway. So the one is a white guy and a black guy. I can't think of the names. Anyway, the white guy had a real issue with the quarterback of the Denver Broncos,
Russell Wilson.
Russell Wilson. He just was going off on Russell Wilson, and now he wasn't playing up to the standard he should be playing, and so on and so forth. And the other guy said, "Well, wait a minute. Whoever Denver played, I forget who it was, they scored like 37 points. Russell Wilson doesn't play defense.
right.
So how can you blame Russell Wilson for that?"
Yeah.
And he went back down. And Russell Wilson wasn't doing this. He wasn't doing that, so on and so forth. But the other team scored 37 points.
That's not Russell's fault. You're right, Tom. He's not playing defense. He didn't have anything to do with that other team scoring.
About the commentators.
Yes.
And what their agendas are, and why they seem to have it against certain guys. It's interesting that Russell Wilson was a great quarterback until he went to Denver.
Right.
Yes.
And now he's not a great quarterback anymore.
Right.
Interesting.
Very.
Okay. Either one of you got anything else?
That's it for me.
I just want to say congratulations to Deion Sanders and the University of Colorado football team in that game they played on Saturday night. I didn't get a chance to watch the entire game because it came on way too late, but to have the nation watching that game after those two teams won a combined 4 games last year, I think that's just phenomenal. What a big turnaround that is for that program. So congratulations to the Buffaloes.
Well, I just think it's more of what's hot now, and so that's what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Let them lose.
Yeah.
See how much they love them.
That's true.
Let them lose to Oregon this week.
Yeah.
We'll see how much they love him.
Yeah.
See how much, they didn't like Deion when he was playing.
Right.
Because he was Deion.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, he still has a lot of haters. There are people who were watching the game just hoping that he would lose too. So they're not all his fans.
Well, I think people have jumped on the bandwagon way too early, and I hope he does well. But they got to play Oregon this week, and
without one of their best players, Travis Hunter.
Colorado State was not a top team,
right?
So hopefully they'll do well. I saw where his son, the quarterback, said he wanted a Rolls Royce or something. He's driving some big fancy car, but he wants a fancier car. And hey, I wish they'd had NIL when I was playing. I ain't gonna be mad at them. That $15 a month didn't go too far.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's you guys got anything else? Let's go to Sean. She's got a minute for us. Sean.
Good morning to everyone joining in with us. My name is Shantia Jones, and this is Got a Minute. I can't believe we're in 2023. Being born in the 80s feels like I can really look at how things have changed and see how far we've come from technology, fashion, and equality. Did you know that in the late 19th century, New Zealand was the first self-governing country to grant all women the right to vote? I'm sure you're wondering, well, how did New Zealand win the fight that granted women, including the indigenous Maori women, with the ability to vote decades before other countries? Well, it was won through curious combination of persistency, a strong relationship with the temperance movement, and a certain degree of luck. Another major influence on political thought of the time were the widely read works of English philosopher John Stuart Mill, who advocated for rights of women. Canada followed in granting women the right to vote in 1917, the United Kingdom in 1918, and the United States in 1920. By contrast, Switzerland didn't grant women full writing votes until 1971 and Portugal in 1976. Now, before I go, here's a quote for you. Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Thank you all for joining in. My name is Shantia Jones, and this is Got a Minute.
All right, thank you, Sean. I think Justice Ginsburg was great, but she should have retired, which means we wouldn't have the Supreme Court that we have now. We'd have a little more diversity and a little more less conservativeness, I guess you can put it. Anyway, all right. So let's go. Hollywood's got the A list, and here on Tuesdays with Thom, we have the G list. Our G list guest today is Fani Sculley. Miss Sculley is with Speaks to Inspire. And she is an accomplished and dedicated professional with a passion for promoting mental health and well-being among youth and communities. As the COO of Speak to Inspire, she leads initiatives aimed at reducing mental health stigma and fostering positive mental well-being in high school and college-age students. She's involved in several nationally recognized programs and initiatives that empower communities to embrace preventative approaches to mental health and foster environments of inclusivity and well-being. Welcome, Ms. Fani. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody.
Well, thank you for being with us. We look forward to hearing you. Before we get started, you got something you want to start off with?
How about I just share my background? I like talking about my background. So we were chatting a little bit about this on the pre-show conversations, but I am originally from South America, Venezuela, born and raised, or like people say here in the South, born and bred in Venezuela, South Florida. And I moved to Pensacola, Florida, where I call home now about 9 years ago. And I started some of my work and some of the things I'm passionate about now, just based on a lot of those experiences here as an immigrant, as an young 18-year-old, ready for life and excited about my dream. And then, when it came to the US, I experienced some adult challenges too. So I'm excited to talk about that today and some of my experience with mental health and my journey.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your experience with mental health. Well, let me read this thing. University of Mississippi football player DeSanto Rollins. He filed a $10 million lawsuit against the coach, Lane Kiffin, and the school over what he says are mental health issues. A quote, for failure to provide equal protection, racial and sexual discrimination, and multiple other allegations. And there's a big article on it, $10 million lawsuit. How do you prove you're having mental health issues, or do you have to prove it?
Okay, well, that's a great question. I think the first thing that we should talk about is the fact that normally when we have the mental health conversation, the first thing that people think about is mental illness. So I always tell people, think of mental health not just as the absence of illness, but think of it as a state of well-being. So when we're thinking about mental health, we think about a range of things, kind of like a spectrum. And so a lot of times for people, they can be in a side of that spectrum where they are doing well and they're thriving, they're feeling energized, they're feeling motivated, contributing to their communities, they're doing well at their careers or college or everything that they're doing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, they may be struggling with a mental illness, something like depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, or the list goes on. And so all of these things, like we were talking about on the pre-show, these are diseases of the brain. They're an illness, just like diabetes is, just like cancer is, just like breaking a leg is, right? So all these illnesses, they also have symptoms and they have signs. And so we can always go to a mental health professional, and based on our experience and some of the symptoms that we're having, they can diagnose us with a mental health disorder. And so that's one way that somebody can, let's say, quote unquote, prove that they are struggling with their mental health. But that's not an easy thing to do because every human being has a unique experience. I personally have struggled with mental illness since I was a teenager. I'm 26 now, and my struggle started when I was about 12. And it wasn't until maybe earlier this year, after over 6 years in therapy and seeking support, that I got a diagnosis. So sometimes you don't need a diagnosis to know that you're struggling with your mental health. We talked about that spectrum, right? But it does get finicky in situations like this where a student is saying, hey, I was struggling, I didn't receive the support I needed, and they're requesting that I have, let's say, a doctor confirm that I was in fact struggling. So in situations like this, it can depend. And the good thing about it is that a lot of young people that are in college today, even though they are struggling, there are resources available at those campuses. So they do have the ability to ask for help when they recognize that something is not going well. And so they can seek that support. And if that leads to a diagnosis, then they can have that type of proof. Or if it doesn't, they can still get support and continue their journey to recovery. So
apparently this guy in Mississippi went to the coach and said that, well, the coach initially asked him, put him on the scout team. I don't know if you're familiar with football terminology,
yeah,
but he put
a
him
little
on the
bit.
scout team. And he didn't want to be on the scout team. And so I guess they were at a standoff, and he told the coach that he needed a mental health break. And apparently other students were getting mental health breaks. He says the white students could get the mental health break and he couldn't. He wasn't allowed to get a mental health break. And so it seems like the school felt like he didn't want to be on the scout team, so he came up with this as an excuse. How does he prove, or how do they disprove that this guy really needs a mental health break? And when did mental health breaks come into being? I guess I just don't know if that was around when I went to school, because we had some guys that probably could have used a mental health break. But
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fani.
Well, that's actually very new. As of recently in the last few years, we have noticed the tremendous need that young people need today. We were talking about it before we enter the show, is the fact that suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth ages 14 to 26. And that's a large population, is teenagers to young adults. And it is a big present issue because suicide is a symptom of, or one of the symptoms of, a deeper issue that sometimes can be depression or anxiety, or some other things that we have mentioned, trauma and things like that. So with it being this month as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and a lot of the conversations we have about is understanding that for a lot of young people, suicide is unfortunately becoming a perceived solution to a problem that they have. Unfortunately, it is not a good solution, right? It's not a solution that ends the pain, but it actually just transfer it to other people. And one of the biggest things that we do is helping not only youth, but all the institutions that we work with, those colleges and universities, understand that students need really, really comprehensive support systems before it gets to a point where they may need, let's say, a mental health break because they're in crisis or they're struggling with suicide. And so through all of these, understanding of this crisis in the past few years, and a lot of organizations and leading agencies like ours doing this work, a lot of universities have started doing things like mental health breaks for students. So the challenging part about that is that every institution is kind of like a world of its own. So they create their own policies, they create their own structures. And sometimes that can be very challenging for students themselves, especially if when they are creating those systems, they may not be considering some differences that happen culturally. I'm Hispanic and I have struggled with depression and anxiety and eating disorders, and I'm a suicide attempt survivor myself. And the way that I have experienced those things is different. That perhaps maybe my peers in college who were here from the US and they were Caucasian, or my peers in college that were African American, or my peers in college that were Asian. So we always want to think about those cultural things, those social things that make a difference in the way that we experience mental health. And that may be perhaps one of the gaps that happen with a specific student, that maybe the stigma that we talk about and just kind of the lack of attention for those cultural differences, they may have played a role in that. I don't know a lot about the particular situation, but that does happen, and it's important for us to consider that. And is why I love the fact that we're having this conversation, because mental illness does not discriminate. It happens to all of us. It happens to every culture, every country, every language, anything. And so it's always important to talk about these things so that they end up rippling into bigger institutions like colleges and universities.
Michael, you got a question?
Yes. Is mental health something that certain people can be predisposed to, like diabetes or, chronic heart failure? Or is it the result of a traumatic experience one experiences in their life, or a sequence of events that causes the mental health? Because you also kind of link it with depression and back and forth.
I love this question. I love answering this question because it's actually all of the above. So there are many factors that play into somebody developing any illness. Like even with diabetes, we know that it's not just one thing that leads to somebody being diagnosed with diabetes. So it is the same with mental health or with mental illness. There are a lot of things that play a role. Sometimes it can be genetic. It could also be some of the family environment, right? Some of the family relationships. It can be trauma, cultural trauma. It can be specific situations. For example, for me, when I was in college, I found myself in a different country, the different language, different culture, and I was by myself. I didn't have my friends, I didn't have my family, my church community. And so here I was isolated from the things that normally help me and they nurture me. And I started struggling a lot with negative thoughts and missing my parents and my family, feeling alone, all these things. And some of that contributed to the depression I experienced and the anxiety that I experienced during my freshman year in college. And so if you think about that, you know, I personally have some maybe genetic things that could have played a role, right? Because mental illness is part of my family as well. I have a lot of family members that they have experienced mental illness and still do. Then I also had life changes, things that influenced my life when I was very young. And then I was also being faced with the challenges of school and my career and figuring out my life. And, you know, all these things played a role. And it kind of created the perfect storm for me. And so some of that not only led to me experiencing depression, but I think most importantly, the fact that I didn't know how to cope with these things. I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the education. And so, if anything, I would say not having the tools, not having the education was probably the biggest thing that contributed to me struggling, because I just didn't know how to cope with all those things. Which is the most important thing when we talk about, you know, suicide, is really helping young people understand that there are so many ways for them to take care of themselves, for them to navigate the challenges of life and the things that they experience and the trauma and the pain and the transitions that are actually conducive for them to experience joy and thrive again, as opposed to suicide.
Okay. All right, Barbara, you got a question?
I do. Fanny, in doing the research for the show today, I learned some statistics that really blew my mind. Almost 50,000 Americans lost their lives to suicide last year. And that was just mind blowing to me. It basically equates to about 1 in 11 people. I mean, one person commits suicide every 11 minutes or so here in the U.S. Did we lose Fanny?
They're working on it.
Okay. And I was just going to ask her, what are some of the signs and symptoms that we should be looking for as family members and friends to help people get through these crises?
Well,
You bring up an interesting subject matter there, the suicide, how it goes along with depression, so to speak, and how many people lose their lives. And it's hard to spot, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever experienced somebody that you knew that ended up committing suicide, but I did back when I think I was going through either Leadership Atlanta or Regional Leadership. This person who really seemed to have herself together. She was a little bit more mature than those of us that were in the class, but
Right.
from a great family. And as a matter of fact, I think her father, if I'm not mistaken, started CNS Bank, which has now turned into, I think it's either maybe Wachovia Bank and Wells Fargo. That's the path it took. But I remember doing our year in the leadership class, she committed suicide. And she had us to her house prior to doing that, and everything seemed great. But she went down to the Hyatt Hotel downtown Atlanta and went up to the very top and threw herself over in the middle of the hotel. And we were all just stunned that this person that we thought was so together would do that,
Right.
you know? And I don't know. It's hard to come up with that, Thom.
No, I agree with you. I think, you know, the instance I've had with suicide, nobody wanted to believe that this guy committed suicide because he was a leader, so to speak. He was out front. He was this and that. And none of us believed it until the evidence came out as to why he was depressed and despondent and so on and so forth.
Right.
Took me a long time to deal with it. Fanny, you're back.
I'm back.
Okay. Where were we here? Who's got a question for Fanny?
Barbara was asking her question when Fanny dropped off.
Okay.
Right. Fanny, I was asking question. I mentioned the statistics and number of people who committed suicide in the U.S. last year, and asking what are some of the signs and symptoms that family members need to be aware of and looking for in order to offer assistance to those who may be suicidal.
Yes, excellent question. So there are a few of them actually. We can think about them as verbal symptoms and nonverbal symptoms. So sometimes people will actually communicate um, either directly or indirectly that they are thinking about suicide. So they may say, I am thinking about ending my life, right? And so that's an immediate trigger that lets us know, okay, this person needs support and they need to be referred to support as well, professional support. But sometimes people can be indirect. They may be afraid of sharing about it, but they're seeking help. So they may say things like, well, I think I'm a burden to everybody, and I think it'll be better off if I'm not here. And so when we listen to things like that, that is a cue for us to just create a safe space and ask the question openly and say, are you thinking about ending your life, or are you thinking about suicide? And if they are, then giving them space to share what's going on, be supportive, and ask the question, see how can I help, how can I refer you. So sometimes people can do verbal cues, sometimes they can have nonverbal cues, like you may see things, for example, like they start giving away their precious belongings. You may see them suddenly try to make amends with people. They may start messaging people that perhaps they haven't talked to in a while, and um, on top of that, they may be saying goodbye to people, making plans, arranging plans for their departure and things like that. They may also be struggling a lot at work or at school. And so there may be some depression there. You may see some lack of motivation and things like that. And in observing that, you see that when they start saying goodbye or when they start saying some of these verbal cues, now they're suddenly kind of have hope, which is for a lot of people when we mentioned that one of the signs sometimes for somebody that may be thinking about suicide is that they suddenly have hope. It sounds like an oxymoron a little bit, but not really, because when somebody has been struggling with negative thoughts, with pain, and things like that, and they perceive suicide as a solution, they may suddenly, out of nowhere, start experiencing hope because they think that it's going to be a solution to that, or that perceived solution to that problem. So we have things like that as well. The important thing that I always like to tell people, it never hurts to ask the question. And if the person just says, no, I'm not thinking about suicide, then okay, great. And that's fine. We keep moving along, right? But I think it's always best to ask. Either way, when we observe some of these things, then not ask and then regret the fact that we noticed some of these things and we didn't talk to anyone. And the other part is that sometimes we may not feel comfortable asking that question. It may be somebody that maybe we don't have that close of a relationship to feel comfortable asking that question. So we encourage people to find somebody that can. So if you know maybe a friend of this person or somebody that perhaps they might trust, you can bring your concerns to that person that they trust and say, hey, I've noticed this. I'm concerned. I care about them. Could you please ask them if they're okay, if they need assistance, if they would like help? So the most important thing is really about us being empathetic, asking the question, checking in with people. That's always the most important thing, because I can say from personal experience, when I was struggling with depression and I was thinking about ending my life, all I kept thinking was, I wish people would just ask me if I'm okay. I wish people would just look at me and look at the fact that I'm in pain or I'm having negative thoughts. I'm wondering the purpose in my life. I'm young. I don't know what to do, all these things. And I just kept thinking, I wish somebody would come and ask me. Right. So a lot of the times this is similar and is a common experience for people that have attempted to take their own life and they survive. And they talk about that a lot is, I wish that somebody would have saw and asked me. So we always say people ask the question, are you okay? Are you thinking about ending your life? And if they say yes, have an open conversation with them, offer support, love, and then you can refer them to resources, which we actually, I think, we'll put in the chat in our website. We have resources for people to go to, and they can check some resources there and know how to refer people to help. A big one is 988. Anybody struggling with mental illness or suicidal thoughts, or even if you're just having a hard day and you just need to talk to somebody, and maybe you just think, my girlfriend is just not going to do it today. I can't call her. This is deep. This is all the stuff. You can call or text 988 and you can talk to somebody completely confidential. It's completely free. Nobody's going to know your business. Nobody's going to know anything. But you can have support. And so that's always important.
So give us that again. If somebody wants to contact somebody, what do they do?
Yes, they can call or text 988. Super simple.
Okay. And somebody will come on and
yes,
they can begin a conversation.
Yes, they have trained counselors that can talk with you. It's completely anonymous. You don't have to share your name. You don't have to share your information, nothing. And it's completely free. You just have to call. And if you don't feel comfortable calling, you can just text. And I've used that multiple times. I fully trust it, and it's very, very helpful.
Okay, great.
That's great.
Anything else from you, Michael and Barbara?
Yeah, Fanny, I'd like to ask you this question. And there's two questions. I think I know the answer to this. One person in our chat box said, do adults get mental health issues? And I think the answer is yes. It does not discriminate. It can be young or old. Am I correct on that?
That is correct. Unfortunately, it doesn't discriminate. We always talk about, if you have a brain, then you have mental health, which means you can also have mental illness sometime in your life. And so it's something that it doesn't matter what age you are, we all experience at some time in our lives. So adults can experience mental illness and they can seek support as well through any of these resources that we have mentioned.
Okay. The other part of the question is kind of twofold, and I'll try and be brief. It seems to me that ever since COVID-19, the world has been totally set upside down, and things are just crazy now. What used to be normal is no longer normal, nor is it accepted now. Abnormal is what's accepted. Is the world going through a mental health crisis?
Well, wouldn't we all like to know? No, I think in 2020 we all experienced some collective trauma, and we were all struggling through uncertainty. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people lost their family members, people that they love and care for. And so I think that the last few years have been difficult for everybody, trying to regroup and trying to find some type of new normal, which we know it's been hard. It's been hard for us to navigate. And so it's been the same for young people and adults. And I think that a lot of people mental illness has been here forever. And the issue with young people was there before the pandemic, but COVID really kind of exacerbated that problem for a lot of young people and adults, because a lot of people were at home alone, in isolation. A lot of people that already struggle with mental illness, they couldn't get the resources and help that they needed because everybody was in shutdown. We could barely go to hospitals and things like that. So I think that right now, some of the challenges that young people are experiencing right now, and adults as well, are a result of all of us just trying to find again some of that normal, coping with all these things that have happened in the past few years, the climate in our country, everything. So a lot of that plays a big role in our mental health, and again, going back to how we cope with things is very, very important, that we all develop tools and we learn to practice tools that help us with all this craziness and chaos going around us. So it is possible that we may be collectively experiencing crisis, but it wouldn't be the first time in history, and I doubt it's going to be the last time either, that we all experience some type of chaos with this. So.
Thank you.
Let me, this guy at Ole Miss, his name is Rollins. Just to give you a little information about him, he's an honor roll student, and he was on the football team. And the coaches informed him that they were going to put him on the scout team, which is the team that just practices, and these guys never play, and they practice against the first team guys, and they get the crap beat out of them in practice and so on and so forth. And so this guy refused. He didn't want to be on the scout team. He wanted to play. And coach told him at that point that he needed to transfer to another school or quit. So in other words, they were getting rid of him. And he didn't want to transfer. He didn't want to quit. And so he had a conversation with the coach and told him he wanted to take a mental health break. And the coach, this is the quote from the coach. The coach told him, said, "Get out of here. Go. You're off the team. You're done. See ya. Go. And guess what? We can kick you off the team. So go read your effing rights about mental health. We can kick you off the team for not showing up. When the head coach asks to meet with you and you don't show up for weeks, we can remove you from the team." It's called being a P word. Yeah. It's called hiding behind. This is supposed to be shit, I guess. It's called hiding behind shit and not showing up to work. He's an honor roll student who is expected to graduate in December with a business degree. Wow. He declined to request to comment on the lawsuit, but told ESPN, "I love Ole Miss, but they do not love me."
Wow. The first thing that makes me think about is, we talked about it earlier, is the need for compassion and empathy in all of us, especially with young people. Thom, you were talking to me before the show, and you mentioned something that made me think about my mom. When I was younger, she would say, "Well, you're young. You don't know nothing about problems. What are you talking about? You're young. And I think that sometimes we can think that way. I catch myself thinking that way sometimes of younger people when I work with teens, and I think, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? But the importance, the really important thing for us to support young people and really help them thrive, and just people in general, is exercising compassion and empathy. And unfortunately, that statement from that coach didn't show a lot of empathy and compassion for that student. perhaps the way that we could have approached that is having a conversation with the student. Okay, I hear you need a mental health break. Let's talk about this. Like, how are you feeling? Because reasonably so, that's a big transition for a young person that was going there expecting something. I don't know a lot about football, but I know just getting into Ole Miss is not easy, right? Not everybody does that. And so I'm sure that that is a very high achieving student, very hardworking student. So to have those news, it was probably very upsetting to him. I mean, reasonably so, it was upsetting to him to know that it was not going to happen as expected. So I think the appropriate way for us to help young people deal with some of those challenges is being a good example in how we help them deal with those things, showing empathy and compassion, perhaps asking them if we can help them cope with that transition, maybe asking them if we can help them transition to another university where they can actually be part of the team. There are so many good things that we can do when we exercise kindness and empathy, that would be much more effective for a young person that is going through something like this. So it makes my heart break that he had to go through that. Beyond this lawsuit and everything that he's going through, I really pray that he has a good support system around him that is helping him navigate this, because now, of course, he went through that dismissal of his feelings and his experience, and now this is in the public. So he's also now having to probably cope with all of this attention that's happening around him, commentary, all that stuff. So I really pray that he has a really good support system around him that helps him navigate this sort of transition and challenge.
Thank you. That's good. I agree with you. And to me, having been on teams, it's like, okay, you're not cutting the mustard, so we're going to get rid of you. I mean, that's what it sounded like to me.
Right.
And we're going to put you on the scout team. And nobody wants to be on the scout team. If you're on the scout team, the next issue is you're out the door. And so it's interesting. So I'm going to close out here. My closing commentary for today, or as I see it, is I'm somewhat surprised that Coach Kiffin would talk to his player in that tone. Somewhat surprised, but not totally surprised. Football is more than scoring touchdowns on Saturdays. Today, college football is bigger than ever with the transfer portal, NIL, and other changes in the game. The behind the scenes is like many organizations, businesses, companies, where individuals have to climb over each other to get to a satisfactory level of achievement. Still, I hope it isn't as crude as it was in those days of yesteryear when we played, when a coach could refer to a player as a black, and I heard a coach call a player a black son of a bitch on the field, or reference the pain that the player's mother went through to birth him. And I won't even repeat what they said in that case. So I'm not surprised, particularly because his daddy was a coach, Coach Gifton. And so he probably came up the old school way, which you could berate people. You could berate students, and they didn't have any. What recourse did they have? They had no recourse. And the fact that this guy's an honor student, I mean, means he's not just a slug,
Right.
So anyway, interesting point, and we'll see. And finally, I want to say Drew Barrymore reversed her decision to resume her daytime talk show during the Hollywood writer's strike. Good for Drew, because they were beating her up pretty bad.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, and that's how I see it on this September 19th in the year 2023. That's our show for today. I want to thank the audience. We appreciate you. I want to thank our G-list guest, Fani Sculley. Thank our sponsor, Best Girl. Thanks again to the TWT team, Barbara, Sean, Emily, Michael, and Joyce. And that's it for this September the 19th. Remember, a day without a smile is a day wasted. Remember to enjoy yourself. Make every day count. Stay safe. Peace.